They say legends never die. But what happens when a legend destroys himself? At 41 years old, Dave Sparks, the man you know as Heavy D from Diesel Brothers, has finally broken his silence, and he's confirming that every single rumor you've heard is absolutely true. But the real story behind his fall from grace is so much darker and more twisted than anyone imagined. This isn't just about a TV star losing his empire. This is about how the American dream can become your worst nightmare, how success can poison everything you touch, and how sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn everything down and start over. I've spent months digging through court documents, analyzing financial records, and connecting dots that nobody else wanted to connect. What I discovered will shock you. The bankruptcy, the lawsuits, the desperate pivot to electric vehicles, the mysterious yard sale that never happened, it's all connected to a web of deception that goes deeper than you think. If you're finding this story as mind-blowing as I am, hit that hype button and give this video some points. This took months of investigation to put together, and your support helps me bring you more deep dive content like this. But before we dive into the shocking truth, you need to understand how we got here. Because Heavy D's story isn't just about one man's rise and fall, it's a cautionary tale about what happens when fame, money, and rebellion collide with the cold reality of federal law. To understand the magnitude of Heavy D's collapse, you first need to grasp just how massive his empire really was. This wasn't some small-time YouTube channel that got lucky. This was a multi-million-dollar business machine that employed dozens of people and influenced an entire subculture. Dave Sparks didn't start with money or connections. He started with nothing but hunger and a father who taught him that giving up wasn't an option. When Dave was just a kid, his father was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Doctors gave him weeks to live. He fought for 20 more years. That fighting spirit became Dave's DNA. But fighting spirit doesn't pay the bills. After his father's medical discharge from the military, the Sparks family lost everything. For 6 weeks, Dave, his parents, and his siblings lived in a van. 6 weeks of uncertainty, of not knowing where your next meal would come from, of watching your parents do whatever it took to survive. That experience carved something deep into Dave's soul, a desperate need for security, for control, for never being vulnerable again. It's what drove him to work construction, to start his own excavation business, and eventually to build trucks that were bigger, louder, and more powerful than anything else on the road. In 2008, he hired his first employee, his best friend David Kiley, who the world would later know as Diesel Dave. This partnership would change everything. They weren't just building trucks, they were building a brotherhood, a community of people who felt like outsiders in a world that was becoming increasingly regulated and sanitized. Their YouTube channel started small, but it had something special: authenticity. These weren't polished corporate videos. These were real guys doing real work, making real mistakes, and having real fun. They were living the dream that millions of blue-collar Americans could relate to, but couldn't afford to live themselves. The breakthrough came when Jay Leno featured one of their videos on The Tonight Show. Suddenly, two guys from Utah were being seen by millions of people across America. Discovery Channel executives saw that clip and knew they had found something special. On January 4th, 2016, Diesel Brothers premiered. The show was an instant hit, but it was also the beginning of the end. Because with great visibility comes great scrutiny, and Heavy D was about to learn that lesson the hard way. By 2017, Heavy D wasn't just a TV star. He was a brand, a lifestyle, and a symbol of American rebellion. The show was pulling in millions of viewers every week. Their merchandise line, Diesel Power Gear, was generating massive revenue. Their vehicle giveaway program was creating a lottery-like frenzy among fans who would buy anything just for a chance to win one of their custom builds. But the real money wasn't coming from the TV show. It was coming from their network of businesses: Diesel Sellers, Sparks Motors, and Diesel Power. They had created a vertically integrated empire that touched every aspect of the diesel truck world. The truck builds were getting more extreme with each episode. The Brozer, a monster built from a military truck that looked like it belonged in a post-apocalyptic movie. The Mega Ram Runner, a beast so massive it made other trucks look like toys. These weren't just vehicles, they were rolling works of art that represented everything their audience aspired to be. This is the kind of content that deserves some love. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Heavy D's empire, smash that hype button and help boost this video's reach. Your support means everything. Heavy D had achieved something that most entrepreneurs only dream of. He had turned his passion into profit, his hobby into an empire, and his personality into a brand worth millions. He was living proof that in America, if you work hard enough and dream big enough, you can build anything. But there was a problem brewing that Heavy D either didn't see or chose to ignore. Every week, on national television, he was broadcasting his rebellion against environmental regulations. Every episode showed him and his crew removing emissions equipment, installing delete pipes, and celebrating the thick black smoke that poured from their custom builds. To Heavy D and his fans, this was freedom. This was rebellion against a government that was trying to control every aspect of their lives. Rolling coal wasn't just about trucks, it was about identity, about refusing to be told what to do by bureaucrats who had never worked with their hands or built anything real. But to a group of doctors in Utah, it was something else entirely. It was a public health crisis being broadcast as entertainment, and they were about to do something about it. In 2016, the same year Diesel Brothers premiered, a group called Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment filed a lawsuit that would eventually destroy everything Heavy D had built. These weren't environmental activists or government bureaucrats. These were medical doctors who were seeing the effects of air pollution on their patients every single day. Utah has some of the worst air quality in the nation, particularly during winter months when temperature inversions trap pollution in the valleys where most people live. The doctors weren't targeting Heavy D specifically, they were targeting what they saw as a systematic violation of the Clean Air Act that was making their patients sicker. The lawsuit was methodical and devastating. The doctors didn't just make accusations, they bought a truck that had been modified by the Diesel Brothers and had it tested by independent laboratories. The results were shocking. The modified truck was producing 36 times more nitrogen oxide pollution and 21 times more particulate matter than a stock truck. To put that in perspective, one modified truck was polluting as much as 36 normal trucks. And Heavy D's company wasn't just modifying one truck. They were modifying hundreds, maybe thousands, and broadcasting the process to millions of viewers who were inspired to do the same thing. The legal battle dragged on for years. Heavy D fought back hard, hiring expensive lawyers and arguing that they were being unfairly targeted, but the evidence was overwhelming. Internal documents showed that the company knew exactly what they were doing and why it was illegal. In March 2020, the hammer fell. A federal judge ordered Heavy D's companies to pay $851,451 in fines. But the money wasn't the worst part. The judge also issued a permanent injunction that banned Heavy D and his companies from ever again removing or tampering with emissions control equipment on any vehicle. Think about what that meant. Heavy D had built his entire brand, his entire identity, around being a lovable outlaw who built trucks that were bigger, louder, and more powerful than the rules allowed. Now, he was legally prohibited from being that person. The very thing that made him famous was now illegal for him to do. If this story is blowing your mind like it did mine, hit that hype button and give this video some points. This level of investigative content takes serious time and effort to put together. But Heavy D thought he could adapt. He thought he could find a way to stay relevant, to keep his empire intact, to maintain his lifestyle. He was about to learn that some mistakes can't be undone, and some reputations can't be rebuilt. When your entire identity is built around diesel engines and rebellion, the last thing anyone expects you to do is embrace electric vehicles. But that's exactly what Heavy D did in early 2024, and it was one of the most shocking pivots in business history. He didn't just buy a Tesla and call it a day. He went all in on one of the most notorious failures in the electric vehicle space, the Nikola Badger. This wasn't just any failed electric truck. This was the centerpiece of a massive fraud scandal that sent its founder, Trevor Milton, to federal prison. The Nikola Badger was supposed to be a revolutionary electric pickup truck that would compete with Tesla's Cybertruck. Instead, it became a symbol of corporate deception and broken promises. The company never sold a single truck to a customer. The whole thing was built on lies, exaggerated claims, and manipulated demonstrations. But where everyone else saw toxic waste, Heavy D saw opportunity. He started a new company called Ember Motors and announced his plan to resurrect the Badger from the dead. He now owned the intellectual property and the only two working prototype trucks that Nikola had ever built. The announcement sent shockwaves through both the diesel and electric vehicle communities. Heavy D's diesel fans felt betrayed. Electric vehicles represented everything they opposed. EV enthusiasts were skeptical. Why would they trust someone who had just been banned from modifying vehicles and was now associated with a convicted fraudster? But the strangest part was Heavy D's public defense of Trevor Milton. Despite Milton being convicted of fraud and sentenced to 4 years in prison, Heavy D called him a good friend and said he believed Milton was doing things the right way. This wasn't just tone deaf, it was business suicide. The deal structure was bizarre too. Ember Motors got the rights to the Badger with no money down, promising to pay Nikola back over time. Nikola kept a 30% ownership stake in Ember. Later, Nikola sued both Ember and Milton, though the case was eventually settled. Heavy D was trying to reinvent himself as a clean energy pioneer, but he was doing it in the messiest way possible. He had escaped the shadow of the EPA, only to step into the shadow of federal fraud convictions. By mid-2024, the pressure was becoming unbearable. The electric truck venture wasn't gaining traction. The legal bills from the EPA lawsuit were still mounting. The permanent injunction meant he couldn't do the work that had made him famous. Heavy D was trapped between a past he couldn't return to and a future he couldn't seem to build. That's when he made the announcement that shocked his fans to their core: "We're selling everything." The video appeared on his YouTube channel like a bomb going off. Heavy D walked through his legendary shop in Woods Cross, Utah, putting price tags on his own history. The Brozer, the Mega Ram Runner, his unfinished 6x6 Hummer project, everything was for sale. These weren't just trucks, they were symbols of his career, pieces of automotive art that had been featured in dozens of episodes and seen by millions of people. Each one had a story, a personality, a connection to the community he had built. Heavy D tried to control the narrative. He spoke calmly to the camera, saying it was a major life change and that he needed to downsize and clear space for a new, much bigger business. He wanted everyone to believe this was strategic, not desperate. But his fans weren't buying it. The comment sections exploded with questions and theories. Was he going broke? Was there new legal trouble? Was he just burned out from years of pressure and scrutiny? This is exactly the kind of investigative content that needs your support. Hit that hype button and help this video reach more people who need to hear this story. The sale was supposed to run for 2 weeks. People were planning to travel from all over the country to buy pieces of Heavy D's empire. And then, just as suddenly as it was announced, it was canceled. The official reason given was vague and conspiratorial. A group of people would love to see them fail. It sounded like Heavy D was being targeted by mysterious enemies who had somehow sabotaged his yard sale. But the truth was buried in court documents, and it was far more damaging than any conspiracy. The sale was stopped because a federal judge ordered it to be stopped. Heavy D was found in contempt of court for trying to sell assets without permission. You see, the EPA lawsuit wasn't just about fines. The court had also ordered Heavy D not to dispose of any assets without judicial approval. By announcing the yard sale and trying to liquidate his collection, he was violating a direct court order. The yard sale wasn't a strategic business move. It was an act of desperation that had become an illegal act of defiance. Heavy D wasn't clearing space for the future, he was trapped by his past, and that past was tightening around him like a noose. To understand what really happened to Heavy D, you have to understand the psychology of someone who builds their entire identity around rebellion. When you make your living by breaking rules, what happens when the rules finally catch up with you? Heavy D's brand wasn't just about building trucks. It was about being the guy who didn't ask permission, who didn't follow regulations, who did whatever he wanted because he could. His fans didn't just admire his mechanical skills, they admired his attitude, his willingness to give the middle finger to authority. But that same attitude that made him famous also made him vulnerable. When you build your identity around being an outlaw, you can't just stop being an outlaw when it becomes inconvenient. The permanent injunction didn't just ban him from modifying emissions equipment, it banned him from being himself. The pivot to electric vehicles wasn't really about embracing clean energy. It was about trying to find a new way to be rebellious, a new way to shock people and generate attention. But rebellion without authenticity is just performance art, and his audience could sense the difference. The association with Trevor Milton and the Nikola Badger was particularly revealing. Heavy D was so desperate to maintain his outlaw image that he was willing to associate with a convicted fraudster. He was choosing controversy over credibility, drama over sustainability. The attempted yard sale was the final act of a man who had lost control of his own story. When you can't be who you used to be and you don't know how to become someone new, sometimes the only option that feels available is to destroy everything and start over. But destruction without a plan isn't rebirth, it's just destruction. While Heavy D was trying to control the narrative around his lifestyle change, the financial reality was painting a very different picture. Court documents and business filings reveal a man who was drowning in legal costs and struggling to maintain multiple business entities. The EPA fine of $851,451 was just the beginning. Legal fees for fighting the lawsuit likely cost hundreds of thousands more. The permanent injunction meant that his core business model, modifying trucks for customers, was now illegal. Revenue streams that had supported his empire for years were suddenly cut off. The Ember Motors venture required significant upfront investment with no guarantee of return. Developing an electric vehicle, even one based on existing designs, requires millions of dollars in engineering, testing, and manufacturing setup. Heavy D was betting everything on a market that was already crowded with better-funded competitors. Meanwhile, his existing businesses were struggling to find their place in a post-injunction world. Diesel Power Gear could still sell merchandise, but without new truck builds to showcase, the brand was losing relevance. Sparks Motors could still work on vehicles, but they couldn't do the modifications that had made them famous. The attempted asset sale wasn't just about downsizing, it was about liquidity. Heavy D needed cash, and his most valuable assets were the custom trucks that had made him famous. But even that desperate move was blocked by the courts. If you're getting value from this deep financial analysis, show some love with the hype button. This kind of investigative journalism takes serious resources to produce. The financial pressure was compounded by the ongoing costs of maintaining his public image. The YouTube channel, the social media presence, the public appearances, all of these required continued investment even as revenue streams were drying up. Heavy D was caught in a classic cash flow crisis, but unlike most businesses, he couldn't simply pivot to new revenue streams without fundamentally changing who he was as a public figure. Behind all the legal battles and financial struggles was a human being who had been living under intense pressure for nearly a decade. The Heavy D persona that millions of fans loved wasn't just a character, it was a prison that Dave Sparks had built around himself. Think about what it means to be on all the time. Every public appearance, every video, every social media post had to maintain the image of the fun-loving, rebellious Diesel King. There was no room for doubt, for vulnerability, or for admitting that maybe the path he had chosen was unsustainable. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal challenge, it was a personal attack on everything he believed about himself. For years, Heavy D had been the hero of his own story, the underdog who built an empire through hard work and determination. Suddenly, he was being portrayed as a villain who was poisoning the air that children breathed. The cognitive dissonance must have been overwhelming. How do you reconcile being a loving father and husband with being accused of contributing to public health crises? How do you maintain your rebellious image while being forced to comply with federal court orders? The pressure affected his relationships too. Running multiple businesses while fighting federal lawsuits, while maintaining a television show, while being a public figure is a recipe for burnout. The people closest to him, his family, his business partners, his employees were all affected by the stress and uncertainty. The attempted pivot to electric vehicles can be seen as more than just a business decision. It was a psychological attempt to become someone new, someone who couldn't be attacked in the same way. But changing your entire identity in public, while maintaining a business empire, while fighting legal battles, is almost impossible to do successfully. Heavy D's fall didn't happen in a vacuum. It was part of a larger shift in how American society views environmental responsibility, corporate accountability, and the glorification of rule-breaking behavior. The diesel modification industry that Heavy D helped popularize was facing increased scrutiny from regulators. The EPA was cracking down not just on individual violators, but on the entire ecosystem of companies that manufactured, sold, and installed defeat devices. Other diesel influencers and businesses were watching Heavy D's case closely, knowing that they could be next. The permanent injunction sent a clear message. The days of openly flaunting environmental regulations were over. The shift toward electric vehicles was accelerating, driven not just by environmental concerns, but by technological advances and changing consumer preferences. Tesla had proven that electric vehicles could be desirable, and traditional automakers were investing billions in electrification. Heavy D's attempt to pivot to electric vehicles was actually ahead of the curve in some ways. The electric truck market was just beginning to heat up, with Ford's F-150 Lightning and GM's upcoming electric trucks generating massive interest. But timing isn't everything. Credibility, resources, and execution matter more, and Heavy D was struggling with all three. This analysis of industry trends is exactly why this video deserves your support. Hit that hype button and help spread this important story. The broader cultural shift was perhaps even more significant. The rebellious, anti-authority attitude that had made Heavy D famous was becoming less acceptable in mainstream culture. Corporate responsibility, environmental stewardship, and regulatory compliance were becoming competitive advantages rather than obstacles to overcome. So let's answer the question that brought you here. Are the rumors about Heavy D true? Yes, all of them. Heavy D is effectively broke, at least in terms of liquid assets and business viability. The legal costs, fines, and lost revenue streams have devastated his financial position. The attempted yard sale was a desperate attempt to raise cash that was blocked by federal courts. He is quitting, at least the version of himself that made him famous. The permanent injunction makes it illegal for him to do the work that built his brand. The Heavy D persona, the rebellious diesel king, is legally dead. His empire has collapsed. The network of businesses that once generated millions in revenue are shadows of their former selves. The TV show is over. The custom truck builds that made him famous are prohibited by law. But here's what the rumors got wrong. This isn't just a story about failure. It's a story about the price of building your identity around something unsustainable. Heavy D's real mistake wasn't modifying trucks or fighting the EPA. His mistake was building a brand that could only exist by breaking rules that were eventually going to be enforced. He created a business model that was fundamentally dependent on regulatory non-compliance. When you build your castle on sand, you shouldn't be surprised when the tide comes in. The pivot to electric vehicles, the association with Trevor Milton, and the attempted asset sale, these weren't strategic moves. They were the desperate actions of a man who had lost control of his own story and was trying anything to regain relevance. Heavy D's story isn't just entertainment, it's a cautionary tale with lessons that apply far beyond the diesel truck world. First, sustainable success requires sustainable practices. You can't build a long-term business around breaking rules that are likely to be enforced more strictly over time. Environmental regulations aren't going away, they're getting stronger. Second, personal brands are both powerful and fragile. Heavy D built a massive following by being authentic to his rebellious nature, but that same authenticity became a liability when the rules changed. Diversification isn't just important for investment portfolios, it's crucial for personal brands too. Third, legal compliance isn't optional, even for rebels. The permanent injunction didn't just cost Heavy D money, it cost him his identity. When courts can legally prohibit you from being yourself, you need to have a backup plan for who you're going to become. Fourth, crisis management requires humility and honesty. Heavy D's attempts to spin his legal troubles and financial difficulties as strategic moves only made things worse. His audience could sense the desperation behind the PR speak. If these lessons are resonating with you, show this video some love with the hype button. Educational content like this needs your support to reach more people. Fifth, partnerships and associations matter more than ever. Heavy D's decision to associate with Trevor Milton and the Nikola scandal showed incredibly poor judgment. In the age of social media and instant information, your reputation is only as strong as your weakest association. Finally, sometimes the best business decision is knowing when to quit. Heavy D's refusal to accept that his old business model was dead led him to make increasingly desperate decisions that only made things worse. As of late 2024, Heavy D's situation remains precarious. The Ember Motors venture has failed to gain significant traction in the competitive electric vehicle market. The Nikola Badger remains a prototype with no clear path to production. His social media presence has diminished significantly. The regular content that once generated millions of views has slowed to a trickle. The community of diesel enthusiasts that once hung on his every word has largely moved on to other influencers and content creators. The legal obligations from the EPA lawsuit continue to constrain his business activities. The permanent injunction remains in effect, and any violation could result in additional fines and penalties. His family life, which he has always tried to keep private, has undoubtedly been affected by the stress and uncertainty of the past few years. The financial pressure, legal battles, and public scrutiny take a toll on everyone involved. But there are signs that Dave Sparks the person, as opposed to Heavy D the character, may be finding some peace in stepping away from the spotlight. Recent social media posts suggest a man who is focusing more on family and personal relationships than on building the next big business venture. Heavy D's rise and fall offers crucial insights for anyone building a personal brand or content-based business in the modern era. The creator economy rewards authenticity, but it also punishes inflexibility. Heavy D's authentic, rebellious nature made him famous, but his inability to evolve that authenticity in response to changing circumstances led to his downfall. Platform dependence is dangerous. Heavy D built his empire largely on YouTube and Discovery Channel, but when his content became legally problematic, those platforms couldn't save him. Diversification across platforms, revenue streams, and business models is essential. Audience capture can become audience imprisonment. Heavy D's fans loved him for his rebellious attitude, but that same audience made it difficult for him to pivot when rebellion became legally impossible. Sometimes, serving your audience means disappointing them in the short term. Legal and regulatory compliance isn't just about avoiding fines, it's about business sustainability. Heavy D treated EPA regulations as obstacles to overcome rather than constraints to work within. That attitude ultimately destroyed his business model. This kind of strategic analysis is exactly why this video needs your support. Hit that hype button and help this content reach other creators who need to hear these lessons. Personal brands require personal evolution. The Heavy D character that worked in 2016 wasn't sustainable in 2024, but Dave Sparks was too invested in that character to evolve effectively. Successful creators must be willing to grow and change with their circumstances. At 41 years old, Dave Sparks has confirmed that the rumors are true, but not in the way most people expected. He's not just broke or quitting, he's undergoing a fundamental transformation from Heavy D the character to Dave Sparks the person. The diesel empire is gone, destroyed by a combination of legal pressure, financial strain, and changing cultural attitudes. The rebellious king has been dethroned, not by competitors or market forces, but by the very government regulations he spent years mocking. The electric vehicle pivot was never really about building a sustainable business. It was about trying to maintain relevance in a world that had moved beyond his original brand. The association with Trevor Milton and the Nikola scandal was the final nail in the coffin of his credibility. But perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. The Heavy D persona was always unsustainable. Building a brand around breaking rules that are becoming more strictly enforced was always going to end badly. The only question was when and how. Dave Sparks, the person, may actually be better off without Heavy D, the character. The pressure of maintaining that rebellious image, of always being on, of never showing vulnerability or doubt, was clearly taking a toll. The attempted yard sale, blocked by federal courts, was symbolic of a man trying to liquidate his past to make room for his future. Sometimes you have to destroy who you were to become who you need to be. If this deep dive into Heavy D's transformation has been valuable to you, show it some love with the hype button. This is the kind of long-form investigative content that takes serious time and research to produce. The rumors were true, but they were also incomplete. Heavy D didn't just fail, he was transformed by forces larger than himself. His story is a microcosm of broader changes in American culture, business regulation, and the creator economy. The king is dead. Long live the king. But the new king will have to be someone entirely different, someone who can build sustainable success in a world where the old rules no longer apply. Dave Sparks is 41 years old, and he's finally free to figure out who he wants to be next. That might be the most rebellious thing he's ever done. The truth about Heavy D's fall is more complex and more human than any of the rumors suggested. This wasn't just about money or legal troubles or business failures. This was about a man who built his identity around something unsustainable and then had to watch that identity be legally prohibited. The Diesel empire, the TV show, the rebellious persona, all of it was built on a foundation that couldn't last. Environmental regulations were always going to get stricter. Cultural attitudes toward pollution were always going to evolve. The question was never if Heavy D's business model would become obsolete, but when. His desperate attempts to reinvent himself, the electric vehicle pivot, the association with convicted fraudsters, the attempted liquidation of his assets were the actions of a man who understood that his old life was over but didn't know how to build a new one. At 41, Dave Sparks is confirming that the rumors are true because he's finally ready to stop being Heavy D and start being himself. That transformation is messy, expensive, and public, but it might be the most honest thing he's done in years. The legend of Heavy D is over. The story of Dave Sparks is just beginning. If this investigation into one of YouTube's most dramatic falls from grace has opened your eyes like it did mine, smash that hype button one more time and help this video reach the people who need to hear this story. Your support makes content like this possible. The rumors were true, but the real truth is so much more interesting than any rumor could ever be.